I remember the night when everything started to unravel as if it just happened. I walked in, kicking off my shoes, expecting a typical quiet evening with my wife Melanie, but something felt off, like you can just sense when something's wrong. She stood by the kitchen counter, gripping a wine bottle so tightly I thought she might break it. Her hands shook slightly as she poured herself a glass, and right then, I knew whatever she had to say wasn't going to be good. Over dinner, she cleared her throat, staring down at her plate like it held the most fascinating thing in the world. Then she dropped the bomb. Vincent, I think we need to take a break, try open relationships, just for 2 weeks. My mind blanked. I put my fork down slowly, struggling to grasp what she had just suggested. You want me to let you date someone else? I asked, disbelief lacing my voice. It's not like that. She replied quickly, almost desperate. It's just an experience. We need a little freedom to figure out what's important. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me, my stomach churning. I didn't know whether to yell or just walk out the front door and never look back. I kept waiting for her to tell me it was a joke, a cruel, twisted joke, but her face remained serious. That's when it hit me. She had already made up her mind. I had no say in this, and suddenly, a single question filled my head. Is there already someone else? I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, stunned. She seemed almost relieved, like getting it out in the open had eased her burden, while I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. After dinner, I needed to clear my head. I grabbed a cigar from the box I kept outside, stepped onto the patio, and lit it. The cool night air did nothing to stop the sweat pouring down my back. As I stared up at the sky, the smoke swirling around me, my thoughts raced. Why was I even considering this? But a part of me, maybe the stubborn part, decided not to blow up immediately. If I stayed calm, I might find out what was really going on. If I lost my cool too soon, I'd never get to the bottom of it. The next day, Melanie was like a different person. Suddenly, she was all about self-care, spending more time in front of the mirror, trying on new clothes, even hitting the gym like it was a mission. I couldn't ignore the fact that her phone never left her side, not even for a second. And that uneasy feeling in my gut only grew stronger. She tried to act normal, but I noticed the small things, the way she tilted her screen whenever she was texting, as if she didn't want me to see. But I kept quiet, deciding not to make a scene just yet. If she thought she could deceive me, she was mistaken. I could have confronted her then and there, demanded to know who she was messaging so much, but I chose to play it smart. If she was hiding something, she'd slip up eventually. They always do. And sure enough, the cracks started to show. After Melanie dropped the idea of an open relationship, I couldn't stop noticing her every move. It was like I had a new sense, something I never needed before, because I always trusted my wife. But now, every little thing she did felt like a clue to a puzzle I never wanted to solve. She began working late more often, or at least, that's what she told me. Funny thing though, every time she came home, she wasn't tired or stressed like someone who'd just slogged through extra hours at the office. No, she'd come back smiling, almost glowing, like she'd just left a spa. And then there was the smell. She never came home smelling like her office, the stale coffee, printer ink, and recycled air. Instead, there were hints of perfume, different from what she usually wore. I tried to hide my suspicions, but every time she claimed to be working late, I made a mental note, tracking the time she left, when she returned, how long she was gone. I didn't say a word, just let the frustration simmer inside. Then came a night when I knew I had to do more than just observe. It was a Thursday, and Melanie said she was meeting co-workers for drinks after work. Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. So after she left, I called the restaurant she mentioned just to check. The voice on the other end said the place was closed for renovations. My blood pressure spiked, my fist clenched so tightly my knuckles cracked. But instead of blowing up her phone and demanding answers, I forced myself to stay calm. If she was lying about this, I needed more than just one slip-up. I needed undeniable, rock-solid proof. A few days later, my chance came. Melanie hurried out of the bathroom, leaving her phone behind on the sink for once. I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Heart pounding, I grabbed it and started scrolling through her messages. That's when I found in Travis a name I had never heard before, but seeing it made my stomach churn. Their conversation was lengthy, filled with inside jokes and casual flirting. But one message stood out like a neon sign. Melanie. I told him about the open relationship, and he agreed. Now we can finally have our night together, just like we planned. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. So this was what she'd been up to those late nights, those secret texts. It wasn't about wanting freedom, it was about Travis. For a moment, I wanted to smash her phone into pieces, but I took a deep breath, shoving the rage down. If I blew up now, she'd just twist things around, play the victim. No, I had to be smarter about this. Without hesitating, I synced her phone to mine. It was easier than I thought. Within minutes, I had access to all her messages, photos, everything. Now I had a front row seat to the entire spectacle. I placed her phone back on the bathroom sink just as she called out from the living room. "Vincent, everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied, steadying my voice, "just washing up." As I walked back into the living room, Melanie lounged on the couch, scrolling through social media like she didn't have a care in the world. But I knew better. I was fully aware of what she was planning with Travis, and there was no way I was going to sit back and watch it unfold. For now, though, I kept my composure. There would be a time for confrontation, and when that time came, it would hit her like a freight train. I realized I couldn't just let Melanie carry on with her little open relationship experiment without making a move myself. If she thought she could mess around with some guy named Travis and come home like everything was normal, she was sorely mistaken. I had played by the rules throughout our entire marriage, but now it was time to bend a few. That's when I thought of Josie, the neighbor 2 doors down, always a bit too friendly whenever we crossed paths. She was the type who held eye contact just a second too long, always tossing compliments with a playful smile. I'd never seriously considered her before. After all, I was a married man. But things had changed. If Melanie wanted to play games, I could too. One evening, after Melanie left to meet a friend, which I knew meant Travis, I grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen and headed over to Josie's. The night was quiet, the neighborhood still, and my heart pounded in my chest, not from nerves, but from the thrill of finally taking control. When Josie opened the door, she wore a silky robe that clung to her in all the right ways, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, leaning against the doorframe, the robe slipping slightly at her thigh. "Thought I'd bring over some wine," I replied, holding up the bottle. "Figured we could catch up," she chuckled softly and stepped aside, her eyes glinting with interest. "I thought you'd never ask." We settled on her couch, the wine bottle between us, and at first, the conversation was light chit-chat about life in the neighborhood and her latest dating woes. But as the wine flowed, the tension between us thickened. I could feel her gaze lingering on me, and when our hands brushed, she didn't pull away. "You know," she said, tilting her head with that mischievous smile, "I always wondered why you never stopped by." Before I leaned in a little closer, the warmth of the wine buzzing through me. Maybe I was just waiting for the right time. Her eyes locked onto mine, and before I could think twice, I closed the gap between us. The kiss was charged, full of the pent-up frustration and anger I had kept inside. She responded instantly, pulling me closer, her hands tangling in my hair, as if she'd been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. Within minutes, the wine was forgotten, and our clothes hit the floor in a blur as we stumbled into her bedroom. The tension that had been simmering between us finally exploded. It wasn't gentle, it was raw, desperate, and exactly what I needed. In the middle of everything, I had a moment of clarity. Lying there, tangled in Josie's sheets, her warmth against mine, it struck me like a splash of cold water. I'd always followed the rules, but if she broke them first, why shouldn't I take what I wanted for once? For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like the guy getting walked all over. I felt in control, and damn, it felt good. Afterward, we lay in the darkness, catching our breath, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound in the room. Josie turned toward me, her fingers trailing lazily over my chest. "Are you going to tell her?" she whispered. I shook my head. Not yet. There was no point in rubbing it in. Melanie had no idea what I'd done, and that put me in the driver's seat. If she wanted to keep playing her games with Travis, I'd let her. But now, I had my own game, and I was just getting started. I knew exactly when Melanie set up her little rendezvous with Travis. It was all there in the texts I'd been monitoring on my phone. Every new message she sent made my blood boil. Friday night, dinner at that fancy bistro downtown. She even described the dress she'd wear, his favorite. Reading those messages filled me with a sick sense of satisfaction. She thought she was being clever, sneaking around, but she had no idea I was 3 steps ahead, watching everything unfold. This time, I wasn't going to just sit back and let it happen. I had a plan. Friday night came faster than I'd anticipated. Melanie spent the entire afternoon getting ready, pretending like she was heading to some formal work event. I watched as she fussed over her makeup, smoothed her hair in the mirror, and slipped into that dress tight black and low cut. She sprayed herself with a perfume she hadn't worn in months, then stood in front of the mirror, making sure every detail was perfect. She was practically glowing with anticipation, and it made me sick. There she was, the woman who once promised me forever, now dressing up for another man. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was seething. She didn't even try to hide it anymore, humming as she moved through the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tiles, checking her phone every few minutes, probably exchanging those ridiculous messages with Travis. "Want a coffee before you head out?" I asked from the kitchen, trying to keep my voice casual. She glanced back, flashing one of those fake smiles she'd perfected over the years. "Sure, just a small one." Perfect. As the coffee brewed, I slipped a small packet from my pocket. The laxative was a sneaky trick, completely tasteless and undetectable. I stirred the powder into her coffee and handed it over, maintaining a straight face. She accepted it without a second thought, sipping it slowly while sitting at the kitchen island, her excitement still radiating. I leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her finish the coffee. Every sip she took felt like a small victory. When she finally got ready to leave, she gave me a half-hearted kiss on the cheek. "I'll see you later tonight," she said, and I replied, keeping my tone even. Have fun. The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. I knew the magic would take effect soon. Exactly 45 minutes later, the front door swung open, and there she was, red-faced, breathless, and seething with frustration. She kicked off her heels, tossed her purse on the floor, and stormed into the living room, muttering curses under her breath. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It was a disaster," she groaned. "I don't know what happened. One minute I'm fine, the next I'm running to the bathroom every 5 minutes. It was humiliating." I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. "I'm sorry, Mel. That sounds awful." She looked up, her eyes brimming with frustration and embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Vincent. I really am. I just want us to go back to how things were. Can we do that for a moment?" I pretended to consider her words before walking over, sitting beside her, and pulling her into a hug. She melted into my arms, wrapping hers around my waist. "It's okay," I whispered, gently stroking her hair. "We'll figure it out." But inside, I was reveling in the moment. I knew things could never return to how they used to be. That bridge had burned the moment she brought Travis into our lives. As she clung to me, apologizing over and over, I stared past her at the clock on the wall, my mind already planning the next move. The game was far from over. It had only just begun. It didn't take long for everything to start unraveling after Melanie's date with Travis went awry. She became a walking storm cloud, swinging between guilty apologies and cold, distant behavior. I let her stew in her own guilt, just sitting back and watching as things fell apart. The house felt suffocating, like it was filled with unspoken resentment that neither of us wanted to address directly. We started arguing about everything, small things that never mattered, before turned into explosive confrontations. Dishes left in the sink, whose turn it was to take out the trash, how I folded the laundry, everything became a battlefield. Even trying to plan a simple weekend outing became an argument. "I thought we were going to your parents for dinner," she'd say, already annoyed. "Yeah, well, plans change," I'd snap back. I wasn't even trying to hide my resentment anymore. I'd see her scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving like she was trying to solve some great mystery, and it took everything in me not to snatch it away. Every time I caught her texting, I knew who it was, Travis. And each time, it reminded me just how far we'd drifted. The final straw came one night when my curiosity got the better of me. I was sitting on the couch while she showered, and her phone buzzed. Without thinking, I picked it up. Old habits die hard, I guess. I unlocked it easily. She hadn't even bothered to change her passcode. I knew I shouldn't have been surprised by what I found, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. Another message from Travis: "Can't wait to see you again. This time, no interruptions." The anger surged through me, but before I could put the phone back, the shower shut off, and Melanie walked out of the bathroom. She caught me red-handed, her eyes narrowing as her mouth twisted into a tight, furious line. "What the hell are you doing with my phone?" she snapped, marching over and snatching it from my hands. Checking to see how deep the knife in my back is, I shot back, my voice dripping with venom. And that's when everything spilled out. "You don't love me anymore, do you?" she yelled, throwing her hands up in frustration. "You're not even trying to save us." I stood there, arms crossed, cold and unyielding. "Why should I? You're the one who broke us." Her face twisted in anger, and for a fleeting moment I saw genuine hurt flash across her eyes. But I didn't care anymore. The part of me that used to care about her feelings was long gone. The argument spiraled from there, turning into a flurry of accusations and bitter words. There was no coming back from this, and deep down I think we both knew it. Every harsh thing I had kept inside over the past few months came pouring out, and she threw just as much back at me. "You're not the man I married," she shouted. "And you sure as hell aren't the woman I married," I shot back. It was brutal, each word like a match setting fire to whatever remained between us. By the end, she was in tears, slamming doors as she stormed through the house, while I sat on the couch, numb and drained. That night, lying awake in bed, I came to a realization I didn't care anymore. I didn't care if she loved or hated me, or if we fixed things or watched our marriage burn to the ground. The love I once felt for her was gone, snuffed out like a candle. I knew I had to end it, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I'd end things on my terms when I was ready, when it would hurt her the most. It was early, one of those mornings when the house felt eerily quiet. I was half asleep, tangled in the sheets, hoping for a few more minutes of peace before facing the chaos that had become my life. But that peace didn't last. A knock sounded at the front door, not the casual tap of a delivery driver, but the kind that told you someone was standing on the other side with trouble. I dragged myself out of bed and shuffled to the door. When I opened it, there stood Josie. She was pale, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. For a moment she just stared at me, as if searching for the right words. "Josie," I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. She bit her lip, exhaling sharply. "Vincent, I'm pregnant. It's yours." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, my mind stuttering as it tried to process what she'd just said. Pregnant. The thought had never even crossed my mind. Before I could respond, I heard the floorboards creak behind me. I turned just in time to see Melanie standing there, barefoot and wearing one of my old t-shirts, her expression shifting from confusion to pure, unrestrained fury. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "You slept with her? How could you do this to me?" Josie took a nervous step back, glancing between us, but I held my ground, no longer willing to play nice. "How could I do this?" I snapped back, my voice rising. "You started all of this with your open relationship nonsense." That set her off. "You could have said no," she shouted, her face twisting in anger. "But no, you had to go and screw the first __ you could find. And you didn't waste any time jumping into bed with Travis, did you?" I shot back, stepping closer. "Don't stand there pretending you're the victim, Melanie. This is exactly what you wanted. Well, congratulations, you got it." The argument erupted like a volcano, months of resentment, betrayal, and hurt pouring out of both of us. We yelled, cursed, and unearthed every hidden grievance, hurling them like weapons at each other. "You never cared about us, not really," she shouted, her face flushed with anger. "And you cared so much that you couldn't keep your legs closed," I retorted. We clashed for hours, neither of us willing to back down, each insult cutting deeper than the last. The tension in the house felt like it would burst from the weight of our words, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. This was the endgame, and we were tearing down the last remnants of our relationship. Finally, I snapped. "This marriage was already over," I said, my voice low but firm. This just sped things up for a moment. There was a heavy silence. Melanie stood there, her chest heaving, eyes filled with angry tears, but she had no comeback. The next day, I filed for divorce. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years, like a weight had been lifted off my chest that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. A few months later, Josie and I were preparing to welcome our baby into the world. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, but it felt right, like a chance for a fresh start, and surprisingly, I didn't feel an ounce of regret. Not for ending the marriage, not for being with Josie, not for any of it. Melanie's open relationship experiment had marked the beginning of the end, but in a strange way, I was grateful, because for the first time in years, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was free. Filing for divorce felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing where I'd land. For weeks afterward, I was caught between relief and fear, unsure if I'd made the right choice or if I was setting myself up for failure. Some nights, the silence in the house was almost unbearable. No more late-night arguments, no passive-aggressive jabs about little things, just empty rooms and the soft hum of the fridge. Sometimes the quiet felt liberating. Other times, the loneliness crept in, making me wonder if I was truly ready to do this alone. Josie became my anchor through it all. She moved in about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. It just made sense. Her pregnancy was advancing, and we wanted to prepare for the baby together. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Blending our lives together was tough, especially when I was still unpacking the emotional baggage from my previous life. Some evenings, I'd come home worn out, and we'd end up snapping at each other over the smallest things: a sock left on the floor, a forgotten grocery item, but we always managed to work through it. This time, I wasn't going to let petty arguments fester like I had with Melanie. Money was tight in the beginning. Starting over after a divorce isn't easy. I took on extra consulting jobs, working late into the night to ensure we stayed afloat. Josie had left her job in marketing because the stress wasn't good for the pregnancy, which made me the sole breadwinner. There were moments when the pressure felt crushing, but whenever I started to falter, she was there to remind me why we were doing this, keeping me grounded. The day Emily was born was a whirlwind of panic, exhaustion, and pure joy. I remember clutching Josie's hand in the hospital room while she screamed through contractions, feeling utterly helpless but trying to stay strong for her. When the nurse finally placed that tiny, squirming baby in my arms, something shifted inside me. I gazed down at Emily, her little face scrunched up and crying, and for the first time in ages, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was a father. Those first months with Emily were chaotic in the best possible way: sleepless nights, diaper blowouts, endless crying. It was pure madness. There were times when I thought I'd lose my mind, running on 3 hours of sleep and stale coffee. But then there were the moments that made it all worth it: her first smile, those quiet dawn hours when I rocked her back to sleep, feeling like the luckiest man alive. Every milestone: her first laugh, her first roll, her first word felt like a small victory, proof that we were doing something right. Raising a baby isn't easy, but having Josie by my side made all the difference. We learned to lean on each other in ways I never imagined possible. Sure, we had our share of disagreements. Who doesn't when they're sleep-deprived and overwhelmed? But unlike with Melanie, every argument with Josie ended with us finding a solution, not hurling blame. We were partners, and that changed everything. A year after Emily's birth, I knew it was time to make things official. I didn't plan an elaborate proposal. That was never my style. One evening, after Emily had finally drifted off to sleep, I pulled out a ring I'd been carrying for weeks and asked Josie to marry me. She didn't hesitate, just smiled, kissed me, and said yes. Our wedding was intimate, with only close friends and family, no extravagant affair. I'd done the big wedding with Melanie, and we all saw how that ended. This time, it was simple and genuine. Standing there with Josie, holding her hands as we exchanged vows, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. I wasn't worried about the future or haunted by the past. I was just content. Not everyone reacted well to the news. Some of our old neighbors turned cold, whispering behind our backs as if we were characters in some drama. I overheard a couple at the grocery store talking about how quickly I had moved on. But honestly, I didn't care. People love to gossip, and most of them have no idea what it's like to rebuild your life after betrayal. Melanie, of course, had her own response. Word about the wedding reached her likely from one of those same gossiping neighbors, and she was livid. She sent me a barrage of texts, accusing me of ruining her life, calling Josie all sorts of terrible names, and demanding to know how I could move on so easily. I didn't reply. Engaging with her would have only pulled me back into the toxicity I'd fought to escape. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Emily became the center of our little world, and watching her grow brought me a joy I had never known. Every new step or word she learned felt like a win, and Josie, she was my rock. She made everything seem manageable, even on the toughest days. Of course, there were still challenges. Balancing work, parenting, and a relationship is tricky, and sometimes I dropped the ball. But now, I had a partner who was willing to help me pick it up, not throw it back in my face. We built a life together, a real one, messy and imperfect, but full of love. Looking back, I realized the hardest part wasn't the divorce or the betrayal. It was learning to let go. Letting go of the anger, the bitterness, the endless what-ifs. It's easy to cling to resentment and let it consume you, but eventually you have to choose. Do you let the past define you, or do you move forward? I chose to move forward. Sometimes people ask if I regret how things turned out, if I wish I had fought harder for my marriage with Melanie, or if I miss the life we had. The answer is simple: no, I don't regret any of it. Melanie's experiment with open relationships may have marked the beginning of the end, but it also gave me the chance to build something better, something real. When I look at Josie and Emily now, I know I made the right choice. Life didn't unfold the way I thought it would, but it led me to where I needed to be. And for the first time in a long while, I'm not just getting by, I'm truly living. It was bound to happen eventually. You can't share years with someone and not cross paths again, no matter how much you think that chapter is closed. I hadn't seen Melanie since the divorce was finalized, and I was content with that. I figured we could continue like this, me living my life with Josie and Emily, and her doing whatever she chose to do after ending our marriage, but life had other plans. It happened one random Saturday afternoon. I was running errands, just trying to pick up some groceries and make it home before Emily's nap. I was halfway down the produce aisle, distracted by a toddler determined to knock over a pile of apples, when I heard a voice behind me. Well, if it isn't Vincent, I froze for a second, instantly recognizing that voice sharp, with a sweetness that always seemed to conceal a barb. I turned around, and there she was, Melanie. She looked different, not worse, just changed. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a tight smile that never reached her eyes. For a moment I wondered if she'd try to be civil, maybe even attempt small talk, but that wasn't her style. "Didn't think I'd run into you here," she said, crossing her arms as if daring me to say something wrong. "Yeah, well, life's full of surprises," I muttered, already wishing I could vanish. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering a bit too long, like she was trying to measure how happy I seemed without her. "So I heard about you and Josie. Must be nice, shacking up with the neighbor there. It was the first jab. I knew better than to bite, but old habits are hard to break." "Yeah, it is nice, actually," I replied, keeping my tone light. "We have a good thing going. Emily keeps us busy, that's for sure." Her smile faltered for just a second at the mention of Emily, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. "Good." Part of me wanted to keep twisting the knife, but I held back. I didn't want to stoop to her level. She crossed her arms even tighter, clearly irritated by my disinterest in whatever game she thought we were playing. "You moved on quick," she said, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Quicker than you did with Travis," I shot back, before I could stop myself. Her eyes flared with anger. "That was different." "No, it wasn't," I interrupted, keeping my voice low and steady. "You wanted your freedom, remember? You wanted to explore. Well, I explored too. You don't get to be mad about that." A tense silence fell between us, thick like the air before a storm. I could see the frustration building behind her eyes, but she had nowhere to direct it. "You know, Vincent," she said finally, her voice quieter but still venomous, "you think you have it all figured out, but someday you'll realize it's not as perfect as you think." I smiled, genuinely this time. Maybe. But even if that day comes, at least I'll know I tried. I didn't give up when things got tough, and I didn't betray the people I love. Her jaw clenched, and I knew that was the final blow. She had nothing left to say, and I wasn't about to let this drag on any longer. "Well," I said, turning back to my cart, "you have a good day, Melanie." She stood there for a moment, probably waiting for a parting shot that never came. Eventually she huffed and walked away, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. As I watched her disappear down the aisle, I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a sense of relief. For the first time, I knew that whatever we'd had was truly over, and it felt damn good. I finished my shopping, grabbed the last few items, and headed home. When I walked through the door, Josie was in the living room with Emily, laughing as our daughter tried to wobble her way across the carpet. "Hey," Josie called out with a smile. "You're back." "Yeah," I said, leaning down to kiss her. "And it's good to be home."